Welcome to my course, Game Development Basics, Week 8, Lesson 8, Space Fighter Updates. During this course, we did spend 2.5 weeks on this project, and while there's always more things that we can update, I didn't feel there were that many things that would add to this course. One thing that I really wasn't happy with was the way that we created our upgrade system. If you remember, we had set up the numbers 1, 2, and 3 to apply some upgrades to the player's ship. And while I originally thought this would be an interesting idea, while playing the game, I realized that it really didn't have the impact that I thought it would. And in most times when I was playing it, it was actually an afterthought that I only considered when I had some time, when there was space between enemies being spawned. I also felt as though the randomness of the loot drops really didn't make for a fun player experience. So what I did is I created a new upgrade system. And just as a quick demo of that, you can see here in the field I have this white glowing orb, and when I go over it, I'm presented with a menu where I'm able to pick from 3 different upgrades that we previously set up. So I can pick, for instance, the power cannon, and then the power cannon will be added to my player's ship. And these upgrades will now drop in place of the other upgrades that we set up. So this allows the player to have a lot more flexibility to pick an upgrade that is relevant for where they are in that level. And I really feel like it added to the fun of the game and made it a little bit more interesting player experience. So I'll walk you through how the system works really quickly. So here I have created a loot called Upgrade Select, and all that we've done here is override the collect loot function, and in here we're casting to game mode, and then we're calling this event Upgrade Select. Now in here we just do a few basic things we've done before. We're pausing the game and creating a widget called Upgrade Select. We're showing mouse cursor and we're setting input to UI only. This Upgrade Select widget just has 2 elements. It has a text at the top that says choose an upgrade, and then there's an empty horizontal box that's directly in the center. And in this Upgrade Select menu, we are just doing a do end loop, and it has this function called get random upgrade that has an output of a loot info struct. And we can see here that we're passing that in to an upgrade widget. And the upgrade widget is pretty basic. It has the upgrade name, it has an image for the upgrade, and it has the text description of the upgrade. And we're just going to update these using the item struct that we're passing in when we create this widget. So the real power of this is in this function here called get random upgrade. And one of the things when I was playtesting this is I found that it wasn't really fun if you got 2 or more of the same upgrades. In some cases, I actually got 3 of the same upgrade, which really wasn't that fun because there wasn't much choice. So I wanted to create a system where there would always be 3 unique upgrades to choose from. And this is the function that I came up with. Now, this isn't the only way you could do this. If you find another way that you think is more efficient or more interesting, please feel free to put a link in the comments, or you can head to my Discord and have a discussion there about it. But this is the system I came up with, and essentially we're going to get our data table, which is called loot table, and we're going to get the row names from that. Then we're going to call a for each loop, and we're going to check that we haven't already picked this upgrade before. We'll notice that we're adding to this array down here. So we're going to go through each element, and anything that hasn't already been selected, we're going to pass into this local variable called possible upgrades. When the for each loop completes, we're going to go back to that array and we're going to choose a random element and then set this to another local variable called chosen. We'll add that to the chosen upgrades array, and then we'll take our chosen local variable and use get data table row from our loot table, and this gets the struct which will pass into the return node. And we can see that we're using a do end loop, and we're doing this 3 times, which will create 3 unique upgrades. Once we have that struct, like I said, we pass it into the upgrade widget, and then we add that widget as a child to the empty horizontal box. and the player will click on the upgrade that they want. And for that functionality, we're overriding the on mouse button down function. We're going to get the class from that loot struct that we passed in to this widget. We're going to spawn an actor and then call collect loot. Now, if we were starting this way from scratch, we may have created a different implementation of this, but essentially what I was doing is using the loot system that we had already set up. So it was just very simple to just spawn the actor and then call collect loot. Then we're going to our game mode and we're calling a new event called resume game. And essentially what this does is just return us back to the game. We unpause, we remove the upgrade select widget from the player's screen, we hide the mouse cursor, we set the input mode to game only, and then we set visibility of our HUD to be back on. So as you can see, just a few function updates has made a very interesting player experience where they can now select the upgrade that they want when there's a loot drop. And I really feel that this adds a lot to the playability of the game and makes for a much more interesting player experience. Now, if you like this system, you can feel free to include it on your game, and you can maybe even go a step further and create different tiers of these upgrades. For instance, what I found is that some of the upgrades were more powerful and you would probably choose them more often, which means maybe those need to be included in a higher tier that doesn't come up as often. And similarly, we had already set up functions to increase fire rate, increase weapon damage, so you could create additional elements to your loot table that maybe include those as well to give the player a lot more options to choose from. Another upgrade I made was we made a system early on in the project where we could put BP track into the level and then our player camera will follow this track. And we never really used it in any meaningful way. In most of the levels that I set up, I just had this continue to be a straight line. But I thought it would be interesting, since we had already set up this system, to utilize it for one of our levels. So here I am in level 1-3 that I created. And as you can see, I created these canyon walls and the track is winding through this canyon. And I thought this would be a very interesting level for the player. But also upon playing it, I realized that it wasn't that interesting unless there was some reason we needed to be winding through the canyon. So I actually created a system where if the player collides with the canyon walls, the ship is destroyed and the player has to start with a new ship. And this meant that there was a lot more consequences, and to me this made for a very interesting level where the player had to be careful in where they were navigating. And this one was a pretty quick implementation. So remember, in the level blueprint, you can gain access to any actor in the scene, and the landscape is an actor. So what I did is I created an overlap event for the landscape, and then I check if it's player ship. And if it is the player ship, then I'm calling death processing on the player ship. We did have to make one change though to make this work. On the landscape itself, with it selected, you can go to the collision settings, and we had to set up a custom collision where pawn was set to overlap instead of block. Without this, the player would never actually be able to interact with the walls, and they would just go up or down them, which meant that the level would become broken and no longer playable. So those are just a couple quick upgrades that you can make to your Space Fighter game. Now, there's many more things that you can do to make this project unique, and I would love to see the changes that you've made to your project. So if you want to share your project, please feel free to head to my Discord, and there's a channel there where you can share the projects you're working on with the community. And we've already had a few submissions from the community of the projects they're working on, and this is something that I'll show in the next video.